This is a Let's Talk Church Safety and Security microsode with your host, Paul Buckner. Hey sheepdogs, some of you guys will know me as being a civilian police chaplain, and I had a recent experience that was one that provokes thought, and I think it has bearing for the church safety space. So if this resonates with you, I want you to think about this in regards to your church, because people tend to gawk and stand around in situations that can get them hurt. And if you hesitate for a second in a situation like this, it can literally cost you your life, or it can lead to a bad situation. So I'm with an officer. I'm a civilian police chaplain. I'm riding with them. A gentleman runs from a routine traffic stop and turns down some side roads, and then ends up actually going into a residential. The officer wanted me to back him. He was by himself. He's trying to get back up there. He's trying to get an accurate address. The road is not marked correctly, not marked well or at all. And so we end up in this situation where, going into this problem, and so the bad guy bails out, falls down, begins to run, bobbing and weaving through. My training is of a very protective nature, executive protection, and my training and experience is basically all protecting other people. So the officer gets out and goes left, I get out and I strafe right, and I go hard right. And what I did was I was able to keep a flashlight beam on this guy the whole time. And he was bobbing and weaving and trying to get that flashlight, that bright LED lumen flashlight off of him, high lumen flashlight off of him. And number one, have a flashlight on you at all times. Number two, I highly recommend a weapon-mounted light. Number three, I recommend night sights, and we'll go over why in a minute. I've talked about this before, but I don't think I've talked about it in a microsode. So if you were in any situation like that, and which is, I found myself keeping that beam and that flashlight on him, the guy had something in his hand, and we could not tell exactly what it was. So it could have been a weapon, it could have been drugs, it could have been, who knows? He could have grabbed a shampoo bottle, but it was difficult to tell as fast as he was moving, as dark as it was. And so there were people coming out of their homes, their residences, these trailers and RVs and different things that were a jumble, haphazard in this little neighborhood. And they were emerging and standing there watching him race by. This is about three kinds of stupid. And this is what people do in situations like this. I commented to my wife last night. We were watching a cop show, and this employee walked the police officers back to what they wanted to look at in the business and then left them. The odds of that happening are about nil. I don't know how many years, of the 13 years that I've ridden with police departments and I've been beside the badge, I don't know of those how many times I've literally had somebody, I'm with an officer, they come back and they don't leave. So if you're reviewing security footage and you don't necessarily need them standing there, they're still going to stand there. Now that's their purview. Some people are just lazy, and that's an excuse to not have to work. And some people are just curious. They want to have the juicy scoop and the gossip for later. So be aware of the fact that people are going to gawk. People are going to try to inject themselves into the situation, or people are just going to be bystanders. And so this guy went running through, and people just stood there. People emerged from their domiciles, stood in the door frames, and watched. And they were 2 seconds away from this person forcing their way into their home. Now imagine, the guy did not do this, but imagine if the guy had gone into one of those homes. It takes about a second to react. And if the guy is running full tilt and you suddenly realize he's running towards you, and it takes you a second to realize he's running towards you and start to react, what are the odds you're going to get your door closed and locked before he can shoulder his way in and take you hostage? This is one of these things that bystander effect is a thing. And people, well, what's going on? I heard sirens and I saw flashing lights. I should walk out and make myself known and be in danger. Maybe just peek out the window, and if the officer's not directly in danger, and if you don't need to be involved in it, maybe stay inside. From a church safety standpoint, if a bad guy flees onto your property, go into lockdown. And we used to have a protocol at my last church over the radio, and we had to use it twice. I would go, lockdown, lockdown, lockdown. And we didn't this was like, if I said this is not a drill. We are not playing. And so people ran, and they would just go up to these doors, and the job of my security personnel, my volunteers, was they were to take a position, they were to shut the door, lock the door, and if there were people outside, to let them in that were knowns. But I would call the threat. And we had one instance where there was a guy high as a kite, and he was about to drill a hole right through the ground. He was walking back and forth so fast. He was about to, at some point, he's just going to start spinning in place and go right through there. It's crushed. And he had just like locked up mentally. And we got law enforcement on the way, because at that point, people can be very volatile. And all of a sudden, they just fixate on you and they try to hurt you bad. That's a thing. Number two, we had a lady that had actually threatened our pastor at that church, and she had shown up in spite of a restraining order, because a restraining order is a piece of paper. It's good intentions. Good intentions. That's all it is. And get it, you need the paper trail, but that doesn't mean somebody's going to stop. A lot of people will, but it does not mean the bad guy's going to stop. And she had been, as a convicted felon, she had been actually talking to law enforcement about where could she acquire a firearm. I need a weapon to defend myself. No, you don't. Because if you do, Karen, you're going, that was not her name, you are going to go to prison. Don't do it. So in this moment, there were several things that the longer I journey alongside law enforcement, the more I'm like, wow, some of the things I see is just amazing that people do. So don't lock up, and you need to train for situations where maybe law enforcement is using your parking lot to practice something, and you let the bad guy kind of run in among your vehicles, and the bad guy is a role player, an actor in that moment, an off-duty cop or firefighter. Many times I have been one of those folks for one of my departments, and I can be quite theatrical when I need to. I've played everything from a child to a teacher, to an injured teacher, to a firefighter, a paramedic. I've been the bad guy more than once, the varying types of bad guys, and in more than one instance, I've actually portrayed the role of a law enforcement officer, once actually being asked by a sheriff to take over the role of one of his officers that was basically the equivalent of SWAT. Very much a huge honor for me, and I fulfilled that role. If they are doing that in your parking lot, and then you could be practicing drills where, as they fly into the parking lot, the person you have in your parking lot, you need 3 layers of protection to defend your church. You need eyes in the parking lot. I don't mean cameras, because you can hear and smell things and see things from the parking lot that no security camera can get you a vantage point on. And keep prepared for watching the parking lot. Lockdown, lockdown, lockdown. And then you've got people that run, and as they run, as they're going around your church from one point to another and getting to that spot, they have the ability to shut that door and man a post, where if there's a bad guy coming, they can take a step back. The person tries to break in the door, they can engage the threat if they have to. My old church, we actually had the ability to split the building in 2. We could actually lock the church down, and I was never able to get it done. One door I was able to get double key deadbolted. The other door I was not quite, before the Lord called me elsewhere, not quite able to get done. But there was an old part of the church and a newer part of the church, and if we had had a threat in the one half of the church, we could have literally evacuated that half of the church. And had I gotten my druthers in place, we could have gone into a full, like a half building lockdown, and tried to contain the threat on that side. It doesn't mean they couldn't come outside and around, but that's why you lock other doors. So that being said, having the ability to initiate a lockdown is important, and not gawking and not injecting yourself in situations that you don't need to be involved in. Now, that said, have a really amazing relationship with law enforcement. Donate things to them, help them with equipment. I literally know of a department in my area that's so broke that a private individual bought them equipment for their taser so they could use less than lethal. A lot of your police departments, this whole defund police movement is really hurting departments. One of my departments was just told by their city council recently that they were given $500 for their entire budget for the year for training and equipment. Okay, a vest alone, a cheap vest, is going to run you $500. a multi-person department, you'd be amazed at how quick that goes. Buy some gift cards to the local restaurant that's pretty decent, where they can take their family out to dinner. A lot of these guys and gals are on a budget. Build relationships with your local law enforcement. Offer them some coffee when they want to swing through. Let them know that if there's staff there at the church, the officer is always welcome to swing into the parking lot and do some paperwork. You can't buy that level of protection for your church. Secondly, they're always welcome to swing in and use your bathroom. Build relationships with local law enforcement. I've said this before, but I can't say it enough. Those relationships save lives. I've literally had officers call me and say, "Hey, FYI, we're not broadcasting this, but there's a guy with a gun. He's believed to be armed. He's in the neighborhood, and we're hunting. We recommend you go into a soft lockdown." And we did. We did a soft lockdown, and then what we would do is just stand inside the door, and I had the parking lot guy just inside the door with my lobby guy, my foyer guy, and so the two of them were watching. All the doors per usual were locked down. They had that door locked, and when they did, and they had that door locked, that presence at that door, had the person tried to come in the door, it would have been much more secure, and no one really knew. It was really quietly done. We just went into a soft lockdown, and when we did, once the service was over, the threat had been called all clear. 99% of the congregation plus over 99% of the congregation had no idea it had even happened. So those things are very real. And very, very useful. Build those relationships with law enforcement. And I've literally multiple times had situations where there was a bad guy on campus, and I've had the responding officer point at me and go, "Buckner, you're with me." Why? I've trained alongside them. I've helped fund stuff for their departments. They know my heart. We've built relationships. We are brothers. And a lot of times that officer comes on campus and they do not have backup. And so it's going to be harder to do that in a larger municipality where you're going to have a lot more officers. But if you can build those kinds of relationships in small town America, and you've got those deputies swinging through, if you're out in the rural country, and you're like, "Hey, we have a breakfast," and we're always letting them know. Call up to dispatch, call your non-emergency number, and say, "Hey, any deputies that are in the vicinity, if they want to stop in, we're having a breakfast this morning on our Saturday morning," or whatever. It's free grub, it's free chow, and a lot of these guys and gals are on a budget. They really are. There's very few independently wealthy police officers. So just something to think about is you got to watch that bystander syndrome. Don't inject yourself into something you don't need to be. Be prepared to go into lockdown. God bless. If you enjoyed this microsode, check out the video and audio versions of the Let's Talk Church Safety and Security podcast.